My husband got upset when he saw the remittance to my mom was only $670. Look at your mom's account, I told him plainly. My name is Penelope. I'm 42, and I work part-time at a supermarket. I have two sons, Ethan in 8th grade and Leo in 6th grade. My husband, Asher, is 43. His mother, my mother-in-law, is 67 and lives alone since her husband passed away. She gets a small pension, but it's not much. When my father-in-law died, we talked about supporting my mother-in-law since she raised Asher and might need help in the future. We decided I would send her $335 every month, treating it like caregiving. We recently paid off the house loan, and Asher's late father left behind $200,000, which Asher agreed to give entirely to his mom as per his father's will. I thought we could manage without income, but my mother-in-law called, upset about the allowance. She couldn't save because she couldn't go to cheaper stores due to COVID. Asher suggested he could buy things for her on his way home from work, but she explained it wasn't just groceries. It was everyday items, so it's not just about buying food, huh? Okay, then I'll go to the specific store for everyday items as well, I said. My mother-in-law exclaimed, honestly, do I have to spell it out this much for you to understand? It's not just everyday items and groceries, is it? Things like hair dye to cover gray hair too. That as well. She shouted, basically saying, please don't make me explain everything. I'm saying that the allowance isn't enough. I'm sorry, Mother. My husband's body language seemed overly apologetic towards his mother over the phone. For now, I'll increase it to $670, he said without consulting me. Huh? $670 is quite a significant amount. I couldn't hide my surprise at the decision made without my consent. Speaking of $670, it's almost like taking all of my part-time job earnings. Plus, our older child will be taking entrance exams soon, and we can't skip on sending them to cram school. I asked the store manager to increase my part-time hours, but in doing so, it became challenging to manage the household. I explained to my husband, Mom, you're never home at night, my younger child complained. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Mom is working hard to earn money for us, I replied, feeling guilty that I couldn't even talk about a cool piggy bank my child made. I made a really cool piggy bank today and got praised for it. But I can't even talk about that now. My child banged on the table, upset. I'm sorry, I'll buy the toy you wanted for your birthday, so I'll work hard for that, I reassured my child. At that moment, my husband walked by, saying, just be patient with the toy. Grandma is making even more sacrifices and going through tough times. Your mother isn't working for the sake of your toys, she's working for your grandmother. His words left me confused. Strangely, our younger child remained and patted my shoulder. Mom, you're doing your best. I can't wait for the toy, so don't worry, my child comforted me. However, that wavering feeling was once again compounded by my mother-in-law. Have you received the envelope? She asked, her voice trembling. Yes, I replied, sensing what she meant. Today, I received an envelope from her. When I opened it, it contained a copy of a bank statement. I immediately looked at the remaining balance. Huh, $6? It's already less than $10, I said unintentionally. My mother-in-law seemed to understand that I had seen the contents of the envelope, and her voice quivered with tears. And then, due to the price increases, I can't even pay the electricity and gas bills, she sobbed. But I tried to continue speaking while looking at the statement. Then enough. All you do is talk about do this, do that, spouting off about useless things and dragging your feet. Last time, too, it was all about doing errands for household items and groceries, and they were useless solutions. That's why I called at this hour. You're there, aren't you, Asher? Take over for me, she said. From the phone conversation, my husband had already come close and said, Mom, let me take over, as he took the receiver from me. Yeah. After this exchange, Asher said, oh no, letting her use up the entire inheritance, letting the balance drop below $10. I'm sorry. I think this is definitely a misfortune for my humble parents. Yeah, I understand. So, starting from next month, if I send $2,000 each month, will that be okay? He blurted it out. $2,000? How on earth could the allowance amount be that much? I stood there in shock as I listened. After he hung up the phone, Asher exclaimed, "Why is the allowance for mom only $670? I told you at least $670. I thought you had increased it," he shouted angrily. "But you see inside that envelope." I tried to make a counterargument, but he interrupted me and continued, "I told you. I owe her for raising me. In the future, she'll probably become weaker. If you think of it as caregiving expenses, why is it that my mother is in such a heartbreaking situation?" He further escalated his outburst with a louder voice. I was at my limit too. Even the $335 allowance wasn't easy to manage. I thought it was an accomplishment to increase it to $670. I also increased my part-time hours to cope with the situation. I even learned how to cook more budget-friendly meals than before. I managed the household expenses with all of those efforts. But my efforts alone weren't enough, and there were sacrifices I made in return, like the time with my children. Yeah, on top of it all, an additional $2,000, and what's more, without even looking at how our allowances are being used in my mother-in-law's bank statement. She scolded me abruptly and decided on a $2,000 allowance without consulting me. Above all, I'm working for the sake of my sons, not for my mother-in-law. That's enough. A deeply cold voice came from me. I realized that when a person gets too angry, their voice becomes quiet. "What do you mean it's fine? Are you getting defensive now?" In a somewhat mocking tone, my husband looked down on me. I was no longer willing to yield to my husband's words. After having seen a copy of that statement, I absolutely couldn't accept such a ridiculous proposal as a $2,000 allowance. I've had enough of a son who blindly believes and supports a money-seeking mother and grandmother. People who can't prioritize our family don't belong here. Get out if you want to support your mother so badly, then go live with her. You can happily go to hell together. I pushed my husband firmly. Then I kicked him out the front door. And I walked my husband out the front door. I shoved the envelope in his face. "I'll send your belongings back, and you'll cover the shipping. Take a close look at the contents of your mother's bank statement." "Huh?" my husband asked in response, but I just closed the door with a laugh. Bang. "What's going on, Mom?" Hearing the commotion, our two children came downstairs. "Well, you two, your father said he wants to spend more money on you. And he asked Grandma to spend more too." I couldn't stand it any longer, so I said to the children, "I see. If you decided this, Mom, it must be for the best for this house." "I'll follow your lead," my older child said. "Well, that toy, I'll wait for it until I'm an adult, no matter how many years it takes, so I'll cheer up," my younger son said to me. "Thank you, my sons." 1 week later, "Help me," my husband called me. "What about?" I replied coldly. "Could you at least listen to my story?" he stammered. But my husband keeps going, clinging to his speech. I had to stifle my laughter on the phone. "I can't believe that you would believe your mother wholeheartedly and then blur out such an outrageous proposal. I can't believe you're calling me now and wanting to get back together. You really have no idea how praising you are, huh? That's just how you are. You're the type who, in moments like this, says huh and questions everything, oblivious to your own indecisiveness. You casually involve others. When pointed out, you react as if it's unexpected." Well, but I suppose it wouldn't hurt to have one final conversation. I want to deliver those last words in person. It's important for the children, and closure matters. I have agreed to meet with my husband in this house. Oh, and make sure to bring all of your mother's credit card statements. Okay, at that moment, my husband and mother-in-law arrived, their lives in disarray. I'm sure I thought this was going to be an absolute bust. "If you just calmed down and looked at the statement, you'd have figured it out," I said. "You insulted me outright and ended up believing your mother, didn't you?" I responded nonchalantly. "So, Can you show me the statement? My husband put the statement out on the table with trembling hands, and while looking down at it, I asked, "What have you learned?" And then my mom, she used the money I sent her for electricity, gas, food. It wasn't just for living expenses, he said in a voice barely louder than a mosquito's buzz. It wasn't just for living expenses, was it? Actually, the other purpose was the main one, right? Please say it with your own mouth. She was a member of an escort club. I'll actually get my husband to say it, his withered confession accompanied by my mother-in-law's trembling lips. I was absolutely delighted, and I couldn't help but laugh. That's right. Your mother, whom you believed more than me, was a woman who spent money on male escorts while lying about not being able to pay the increased electricity and gas bills, and came begging to her own son. The statement showed the name of an escort club, Romeo, followed by high-end restaurants and bars. She was spending over $40,000 a month. After a good laugh, I took a sip of cold water to cool down my head and then continued speaking. Even when you're nearly 70 years old, how could you pick a young, handsome guy at an escort club and take him around to all the high-end restaurants? I don't know how she got that way, and how did she end up begging for money at her own son's house? I'm really curious if she ended up addicted or something like that. I scratched at the wound and pride of my mother-in-law. Unexpectedly, my husband spoke. He told me he feels love for the princess who gives him an allowance. He even gives me presents. This made me blow out the water I had been drinking to cool my head. I ended up giggling and laughing. The water had gone to waste. Referring to a 67-year-old as a princess is quite something, isn't it? Well, by uttering words, some people fall for it, like my mother-in-law becoming like a man's personal ATM. So they'll keep saying those words, won't they? However, I took another sip of water. If you're giving an escort guy an allowance, you must be withdrawing a considerable amount, right? It wasn't my mother-in-law who visibly shuddered. Huh. The voice that uttered this was indeed my husband's. I placed a piece of paper on the table. It was a business card with a handwritten message. It was fun meeting you today. I love you. Please request me again. Huh? My husband stared at the business card on the table. I didn't expect to be kicked out of the house all of a sudden. I didn't even tidy up my own room, did I? I found your stuff while I was cleaning up your things. Even the strange money deductions. It all makes sense now, he said. Yes, that's right. So it's not just my fault, my mother-in-law shouted in a loud voice. There was a glass of lemonade in front of her, but she hadn't touched it at all. It might be expected since she had been continuously blamed. However, as the target of blame shifted, she attempted an unexpected turnaround. What? My husband's voice trembled as he reacted to this blow. But because I've been laughed at this much, am I the only one being ridiculous? Isn't that so unfair? No, just wait a minute. You're making me spend this much money, and now you're saying this. That's my line. Asking for money because your allowance isn't enough. I can't believe you're into escort girls too. Like parent, like child. Must be an annoying way to spend money. It's over now, isn't it? Both of you are done, I said. At my words, both my husband and mother-in-law had no words left. Enough is enough. I called the children on the second floor. Come down for a minute. The two children came down. We're parting ways because your dad and grandma have been spending too much money on themselves until now, I said. Your dad has been spending a lot of money on another woman, and your grandma has been spending a lot of money on a younger man. They want even more, I explained candidly. Hold on, don't say that in front of the kids. My husband tried to intervene. No, if we're using money like that, Mom will have no choice but to say something. I don't like you, Dad, trying to hide things, the older child continued. I mean, giving money to other people and then saying there's no money for toys. Don't mess around. I might be okay without toys, but my big brother probably has tutoring fees to pay, the younger one said. That's right, that's right. You see, I want to use the money for your future. Now say goodbye to people who spend their money on strangers, I said. On hearing my words, my older child said, it's goodbye for us too. And my younger child said, I'll learn to do without toys. It's despicable that he spent money on something other than you, Mom. In the end, it was only natural, but I cut ties with both my husband and my mother-in-law. I got a large amount of alimony because of the divorce due to my husband and mother-in-law's spending. On the other hand, my husband and mother-in-law, who had once indulged in frivolous spending, were a regrettable case, and I could anticipate the consequences. They continued to indulge until they hit rock bottom. As a result, it seems they accumulated debts to the extent that they had to let go of the house, even though they have to pay both alimony and child support. What on earth are they doing? Of course, I have no intention of making concessions. I expect them to pay in full. I continued to work part-time after that. We couldn't afford many luxuries, but somehow the three of us managed to lead a decent life. It's modest, but I want to do what I can for the children. I hope to continue living harmoniously with the three of us in the future.